Hemp vegetative biomass, so if you want to go for fiber and herd, relies on a late flowering signal.
We're just going to now welcome our second speaker from the Trobe, which I've got to acknowledge also as a sponsor of the Trobe Institute for Sustainable Agriculture and Food, has been a big part of helping put this on. We have Veronica on the organising committee. There's been a lot of work to come in, and again, but it also works for our sponsors because it highlights this wonderful building, and we're learning a little bit more about the capabilities that do exist here in Trobe, but also those capabilities that we're going to have to expose ourselves to, we're going to have to find out about as we develop these markets into these end users. So very exciting to be here in this wonderful building, and we thank the Trobe Institute for Sustainable Agriculture and Food, often referred to as LISA. Okay, but in the meantime, let's welcome up Dr. Ricarda Jost, who's again from the Trobe University. We're very interested now to see what Monica's talking about and how it actually applies in research. So understanding nutrient use in hemp and its impact on biomass production and flowering. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Richard, and thank you all the organizers for giving me the opportunity to talk, and in particular Stuart Gordon for the feedback on my presentation. So I hope I will do that justice. So I want to give a little bit more background on what you all know, but just going through some things that I found out as when I got to know hemp a little bit more in my research. So obviously we had a basal ancestor to hemp, and then over more than 1,000 years of human selection, we got these two very different looking plants. One is the drug type and one is the hemp type cannabis. And through human selection, the drug types have really a very different status. They are very compact and they have early flowering. They put all their biomass into flower production, and obviously the cannabinoids have been selected for very actively by interested human beings. And they need the female flower to have the maximum impact there. The hemps are very tall because we were more interested in fiber production, and also hemp has been further modified to really favor reproductive growth for seed oil, CBD oil. So that's also looking at flowers. But then vegetative growth really promotes the fiber and fiber herd production. It also enables bioremediation. So there's different growth types and different developmental processes that really favor one over the other. And I want to talk a little bit more about what helps cannabis make these decisions in the field. I've listed a few challenges here. One is that breeding efforts were really very much restricted to the regulatory frameworks in the industry, so research was very much impeded by that. And that also had consequences for genome sequencing. So we are only just beginning to see better genome annotation. And of course, that is really important for making quick progress in marker-assisted breeding programs. Then hemp is naturally outcrossing. So that is a big problem because it creates heterogeneity, for example, with respect to THC content, but also in the transition from vegetative to reproductive growth and flowering time. Cannabis has a large sexual dimorphism, and that affects plant morphology, flowering time, and fiber quality. So you really want to promote the female plants in your population to get the best quality aspects. And unfortunately, sex determination is actually a quantitative trait. So it is impacted by the environment and by hormonal signals. So that is an additional challenge for the growers. And in my talk, I just want to give examples for two things. One is the day length response, and the other one is the nutrient availability. And both have really massive impacts on cannabis yield and performance in the field. So this is the day length response. In cannabis, it's a quantitative response. So you see if you grow the plants under long days, so that's around 18 hours of day length, then you have perfect vegetative growth, so very good for fiber production. If you grow plants under short day conditions, then you have nice compact flowering plants. And you see here in this graph that actually it's a quantitative trait. So if you offer the plants something like 5 days of short day, they start to flower really more or less immediately. If you revert them back to long days, they become vegetative again. So cannabis goes back and forth and back and forth. And you can really see that it's amazing. Like I've never seen that in any other plant. So the meristems switch back, forth, back, forth. So of course, as Stuart pointed out in his best management practice manual, the time of sowing and the variety selection are really important, and you need to check your latitude for sure. Another thing that is actually well known is the nitrogen use of cannabis. They really prefer very moderate nitrogen inputs, and that's what makes it a sustainable crop. They don't need as much nitrogen input as our cereal crops, which are more at this end. And actually, cannabis, or especially the hemp types, don't really like these high nitrogen supplies, and they often suffer other nutrient limitations if you, like phosphate deficiency, if you push them too hard. So this area is a good input for nitrogen, and we took that and then investigated the response to phosphate. And in terms of phosphate use, cannabis is quite an average crop, so the optimum is between 0.5 and 1 millimolar, or 16 to 32 ppm. So this is all pretty normal. So then our PhD student Ben looked at the nitrogen uptake systems, and we studied roots and young stems. And you can see that phosphate has a very unusual pattern. So they keep taking up phosphate as you increase phosphate supply. And this is not something that our common crops do. Like tomato doesn't do that, cereals don't do that. What they would really do is they would make sure that their nitrate levels keep up with the amount of phosphate available. But in cannabis, we see a sharp drop in nitrate concentrations as you increase phosphate supply. So it's really quite sensitive to too much phosphate. We looked at other organs, and essentially we don't see this stimulation of nitrate uptake as you supply more phosphate. So that's a very unusual pattern. And in the zinc organs, we see what we know from other plants as well, that sulfate can substitute for a lack of phosphate, and these plants do it very well. So if you have very low inputs of phosphate, they just take up more sulfate and make up for the lack of phosphate. So there's some normal aspects, but there's also some very unusual behaviors in these plants. And this is basically one of the puzzling responses that I'm still trying to work out. So basically, if you have a vegetative hemp plant, you can increase the nitrogen levels a little bit, and it will be reasonably fine. If you take a flowering hemp plant, then it really doesn't like the higher inputs at all. So you see this is a very poorly developed plant. And while you have a poor flower harvest index in vegetative conditions, under the under the high and short day conditions, these plants really suffer. If you reduce the nitrogen input, the flower yield is actually much improved. So there's a very fine balance to be had with nitrogen and phosphate inputs in cannabis, and it depends whether you are looking at short day or long day conditions, so whether you are looking at the vegetative stage or the flowering stage. And this is just to reiterate, we also see that on the root uptake systems, this difference between long days and short days. So again, under the long days, the roots do not promote further nitrate uptake with increasing phosphate supply, but under short day conditions, they do. So it's really a developmentally controlled program, and there's a lot of feedback from hormonal pathways that really trigger the development of flowering. And this is just a little advertising slide for our phenotyping facilities. So some of you have seen the facilities yesterday, and we have been using our camera systems that Monica alluded to. And one of our PhD students has actually managed to use these data to, one, predict metabolite concentrations in cannabis flowers, so we can distinguish between THC and CBD concentrations and determine them non-invasively. We can also do chemovar classifications at very early stages of plant development, which can be useful if you want to separate the THC producing from the CBD producing plants in your field, for example. We can also do sex determination and predict the flower maturity. So this is just a little spiel. As a conclusion, I want to say that hemp vegetative biomass, so if you want to go for fiber and hurd, really relies on a late flowering signal and a very balanced N and P input, while if you want to encourage hemp flowers and seed production and you want to target cannabinoids in oil, then you definitely need to grow them under short days, and the harvest index improves greatly under relatively moderate N and higher P inputs. The crosstalk between nutrient sensing and hormonal signaling is really something that we need to understand a lot more. So I think that requires really a lot more research, and we are looking into all the molecular determinants for that in our PC Hub for Protected Cropping. And of course, these non-invasive imaging techniques can help with field assessments, because once we have indices, you can actually modify the imaging systems to work on drones. So this is something that is also occurring within the Australian Plant Phenotyping network. So we are really working on the field applications of these imaging systems. Lastly, I want to acknowledge the people involved. So obviously our two PhD students who are just about to submit their thesis. So very exciting times. And of course our Hub directors, Monica, Matthew, and Tony, and also Veronica, and our cultivators and imaging team. And thank you very much for your attention.